Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit LegacyPMInvestments.com. That's LegacyPMInvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So today was a very big day on Capitol Hill as the House Judiciary Committee sat down with former special counsel Robert Hur, who of course investigated President Joe Biden and his retention of classified documents. So this took place for several hours on Capitol Hill with both Republican and Democratic lawmakers having the opportunity to ask special counsel Hur about his report. This was Jim Jordan's opening statement as chairman.
The witness. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. Robert Hur was appointed special counsel on January 12th, 2023. He had a fundamental question to address. Did Joe Biden unlawfully retain classified information? The answer, yes, he did. Page 1 of Mr. Hur's report, he says this: our investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. He further writes, Mr. Biden willfully retained marked classified documents about Afghanistan and handwritten notes in his notebooks, which he stored in unsecure places in his home. Joe Biden kept classified information, and Joe Biden failed to store classified information properly.
So special counsel Hur said ahead of the hearing in some of the reports that this would focus solely on Joe Biden and his actions rather than President Donald Trump and his case out of Florida for the same type of classified document retention. Of course, some media commentators are trying to suggest that the difference and the distinction between those two cases is the cooperation with special counsel, and special counsel Hur's report focused solely on Joe Biden and those willful retention of documents. But some of the things that he said in his opening statement even really seemed to be contradictory and didn't quite make sense as to why he arrived to the legal conclusion not to prosecute Joe Biden for willful retention of classified documents. Here's part of what special counsel Hur said in his opening.
My team and I conducted a thorough, independent investigation. We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. This evidence included an audio recorded conversation during which Mr. Biden told his ghostwriter that he had, quote, just found all the classified stuff downstairs, end quote. When Mr. Biden said this, he was a private citizen speaking to his ghostwriter in his private rental home in Virginia. We also identified other recorded conversations during which Mr. Biden read classified information aloud to his ghostwriter. We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden. The department's regulations required me to write a confidential report explaining my decision to the Attorney General. I understood that my explanation about this case had to include rigorous, detailed, and thorough analysis. My report reflects my best effort to explain why I declined to recommend charging President Biden. I analyzed the evidence as prosecutors routinely do, by assessing its strengths and weaknesses, including by anticipating the ways in which the president's defense lawyers might poke holes in the government's case if there were a trial, and seek to persuade jurors that the government could not prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's really fascinating. So I always thought, as a former criminal defense attorney myself, that the evidence that is required for a prosecutor to bring his case is just simply fulfilling the burden of proof and the burden of production. Interestingly, Special Counsel Hur didn't make any reference to those prosecutorial burdens and instead said that he couldn't prove his case beyond any and all reasonable doubt. Of course, that is the criminal standard, but that's the province of the jury. As long as a prosecutor fulfills their burden of proof and production, they, of course, then can attempt to convince a jury. And so for Special Counsel Hur to say that he's taken into consideration all of the ways that defense lawyers might poke holes into the prosecutor's case and that they may not be able to convince the jury, that would mean really that prosecutors never charge in any cases, because that's the job of a defense attorney, is to try to poke holes in the prosecutor's case and try to tell a jury that the prosecutor has not met the legal standard of proof beyond any and all reasonable doubt while at trial. But that's generally not what prosecutors take into account when they're looking at charging their case. I mean, of course, President Trump, when he's facing these criminal charges out of the state of Florida in that district court, and of course, that's federal court, didn't the prosecutor even consider any ways that his defense lawyers might poke holes in his case and then say, well, we'll decline to go ahead and charge that? So it seems that a Special Counsel Hur is setting up a scenario where he's suggesting that there's no way that the prosecution could have possibly prevailed after he already admitted in his opening that he found that Biden was making statements that admitted that he willfully retained documents, classified documents, while he was a private citizen. So how are these two cases between President Trump and Joe Biden similar or dissimilar? It seems to be the only difference here is the special counsel and his report, but also the fact that the special counsel seems to be treating President Biden very differently than a similarly situated former President Trump. And this is why conservatives always take issue with, it seems like the Democrats are just getting off scot-free when conservatives and Republicans are held to the very letter of the law in every single instance and never given any sort of benefit of the doubt or benefit of maybe a jury of President Trump's peers actually sitting down in a jury box and saying, you know, we probably aren't going to find him guilty. And there seems to be, at least with the reports that have been publicly made available, it seems to be like there's a lot more concern and wiggle room for President Trump's attorneys to go into court and say, you know, this is just a report that he somehow flashed around some classified documents. And of course, he retained those documents legally according to the Presidential Records Act and all of the things that his lawyers have already asserted as the defense in media. So why is he being treated differently? And of course, that's what the House Judiciary Oversight Committee is looking at with respect to Joe Biden. So I'm going to get into this more with my next guest, who is himself a lawyer. But the problem that I have, not only as a current lawyer myself, but also as a conservative, is this lack of similarity in standard. And it does seem to be that Special Counsel Hur is saying, well, just because Joe Biden doesn't remember and he's going to be perceived by the jury as this codgety old man who doesn't remember, we just won't, we'll decline to prosecute him. We don't really care. Is this really justice? Well, we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight to discuss. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. As special counsel Robert Hur's testimony continued on at Capitol Hill earlier today, he made some very interesting comments about what he did and didn't find, and also the president's mental acuity, and saying, interestingly, that the president himself brought his own mental status into this case, and he had to make that determination. This is cut 3.
There has been a lot of attention paid to language in the report about the president's memory, so let me say a few words about that. My task was to determine whether the president retained or disclosed national defense information willfully. That means knowingly and with the intent to do something the law forbids. I could not make that determination without assessing the president's state of mind. For that reason, I had to consider the president's memory and overall mental state and how a jury likely would perceive his memory and mental state in a criminal trial. These are the types of issues that prosecutors analyze every day. And because these issues were important to my ultimate decision, I had to include a discussion of them in my report to the Attorney General.
And representatives, of course, part of the House Judiciary Committee had an opportunity to question Robert Hur, and Representative Armstrong had this exchange.
Mr. Hur, classified documents were found at the Penn Biden Center?
That's correct.
They were found in President Biden's garage?
In Wilmington, Delaware, yes.
And in his basement den?
Also in the same home, yes.
And his main floor office?
Correct.
And his third floor den?
Correct.
At the University of Delaware?
Correct.
And at the Biden Institute?
Correct.
Josh Hammer is the senior editor at large for Newsweek and host of the Josh Hammer Show, and he joins me now. So, Josh, this was a really interesting exchange because it seems like all of the elements of a criminal offense that should be charged similarly to former President Trump have been met, even in Robert Hur's own admissions. And yet he's focusing so much on jury perception and how defense lawyers might poke holes in the case rather than the burden of proof and burden of production that is really just the basic threshold for a prosecutor. So what did you make of his explanation as to why he didn't charge President Biden?
So I think Robert Hur, Jenna, acquitted himself well when it comes to his defense as to why it was so necessary, first of all, to talk about Joe Biden's memory, his memory lapses, and all of that. Look, I mean, criminal law 101, you're a lawyer, Jenna, as every first-year law student learns in your criminal law course. You have multiple elements into the prosecutorial process. And the two key elements for our purposes are you have the mens rea, which is the Latinate term referring to the mindset, the mentality. And then you have the actus reus, which is the Latinate term referring to the actual act itself. So to give a very crude example, it is a differing mens rea, a differing mentality, which is how you get from first or second degree murder down to manslaughter, down to negligent homicide, and so forth there. And the relevant statute that Robert Hur was tasked with investigating to see whether or not Joe Biden was in violation of it called for a mens rea of willfulness. So that made it very, very starkly obvious that he had to start engaging whether a man in Joe Biden's current mental capacity, given the fact that he is palpably senile, that he is committing quote unquote gaffes left and right, that he is confusing the country of Mexico for Egypt, Sisi being the president of Egypt, not Mexico. Examples like that made it very clear that he had to talk about Joe Biden's memory. And Robert Hur, I think, was also acquitted this morning, Jenna, when we saw the transcript finally released. And this transcript is for Robert Hur's conversation with Joe Biden. And we finally saw that Joe Biden's condemnations of Robert Hur for talking about Beau Biden's death date are totally unfounded. In fact, we now have the clear, unambiguous transcript evidence that it was Joe Biden himself who started rambling about the fact that he couldn't remember when Beau Biden died. So that the fact, if he was then lying about that, if he was lying about the fact that he said Robert Hur was the one who invoked his son's death date, that makes his not really any of this credible in the first place. So there's a lot of moving parts here. The part that I think that you and I are probably most interested in is this comparison of this conduct to what's happening in Mar-a-Lago in Jack Smith's classified documents case there. And there are a lot of ways that these two prosecutions are similar, and there are a lot of ways that they're different. The most important legal grounds that makes Donald Trump's case much more innocent, I would argue, than Joe Biden's similar conduct is that Donald Trump was the president of the United States, Jenna. He had the executive power, of which Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1 of the Constitution speaks. He had the commander-in-chief prerogative as well. Those two clauses do not apply, period, full stop, end of story, to a vice president. And Joe Biden's conduct here that Robert Hur was investigating solely pertained to his conduct when he was vice president, not currently as president. So I think that Donald Trump comes out of this looking very good. There's a big hearing there in Judge Aileen Cannon's courtroom in Fort Pierce, Florida this Thursday that I know that I'm tracking very closely. I look forward to what happens there. But I think that Donald Trump is definitely a winner from today's events on Capitol Hill.
And so, Josh, and I agree with all of that. And I think that there is an emphasis in the media, or perhaps an overemphasis on the special counsel's language contemplating Biden's mental state. How does that, regardless of the legal and how these cases are similar or dissimilar, how does this potentially impact the political fallout, of course, heading into the November 2024 election? I mean, because if Joe Biden is not competent enough to stand trial, then is he really competent enough to have his finger on the nuclear button?
So there's multiple elements of the political fallout. For starters, the fact that this hearing on Capitol Hill is happening less than a week after the State of the Union address is a very big deal. So I think Biden's inner circle, the DNC, those folks, they very much wanted Joe Biden's State of the Union address to be his unequivocal refuting of the so-called rumors that he is fully in control of his mental and physical capacities. And that's why they drugged him up on B12 or who knows what kind of White House-approved drug cocktail they had him up there on to make sure that he didn't keel over during that hour-and-a-half harangue of the American people. But the fact now that Robert Hur is here testifying before the House Judiciary Committee just 5 days later is just a visceral reminder to swing state voters, moderates, independents, that no, I mean, Robert Hur wrote a 300-plus page lengthy, detailed report. And one of the stated reasons, in fact, the leading reason why he did not ultimately recommend pursuing charges is because this guy literally he's not there. I mean, he's senile, so that he can't meet the willfulness mens rea that is necessary under the statute. So I think that's a very, very big deal from a political perspective. The second main area of political fallout, Jenna, getting back to Donald Trump's own case in Judge Cannon's courtroom in Florida, is I think that this elevates the likelihood of acquittal for Trump in that case, even if it ultimately reaches a jury, which is dubious based on the legal calendar before the November election. But the fact that there is so much painting of the media narrative now, and properly, as to whether or not there are two standards here, one for Biden and one for Trump, surely, I think increases the chances that you're simply not going to get a unanimous jury pool there in Judge Cannon's courtroom, even if that case ultimately makes it to a jury verdict.
Yeah, and we'll leave it there. And I really appreciate your analysis here. And it'll be very interesting to follow that out of Florida. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. As you know, my friend Mike Lindell has a passion to help everyone get the best sleep of their life. He didn't stop by simply creating the best pillow. Mike created the Giza Dream bed sheets. They look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for my busy schedule. Mike found the world's best cotton. It is ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's Giza sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. The Giza Dream Sheets come in a variety of sizes and colors. Mike's latest incredible deal is the sale of the year. For a limited time, you will receive 50% off the Giza Dream Sheets. You will also receive a set for as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com, click on the radio podcast square, and use the promo code Jenna. There you will find not only this amazing offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, which I have and I love, the MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and now even flannel sheets and so much more. We definitely need flannel sheets for as crazy as all of this weather has been lately. So go to mypillow.com and make sure you use the promo code Jenna or call 1-800-564-8475. That's 1-800-564-8475 and use the promo code Jenna. There is still controversy surrounding TikTok, and interestingly, former President Trump has actually tweeted or posted on Truth Social that he is in favor of TikTok not being quite as heavily regulated in the United States. But then, of course, there continues to be lawmakers on Capitol Hill who are suggesting that TikTok is harmful. So this thread coming from FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr that says, on the foreign influence front, ahead of the most recent U.S. midterms, TikTok allowed the CCP state media to run accounts without disclosing the state media tie that targeted U.S. politicians for criticism and pushed divisive content about social issues. It went on to say, in America, TikTok pushes videos to kids that promote self-harm, eating disorders, and suicide. In China, the version of TikTok available there, the app shows young kids science experiments, museum exhibits, and other educational material. So Brendan Carr joins me now. So this is really fascinating to see, kind of the differences in usage. Is this more about the CCP's control of TikTok in China versus what Americans tend to gravitate to, unfortunately, with TikTok users being primarily Gen Zers in the United States?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Jenna. I mean, ultimately, all of this evidence goes to the CCP's ultimate control over TikTok. And most people think it's just a fun platform for sharing dance videos or cat videos. But as we sort of talked about there, it collects reams of highly sensitive data on Americans, everything from search and browsing history, keystroke patterns, biometrics, location data. And for years, TikTok said, well, don't worry, none of that data even exists inside of China. But then a blockbuster report came out and showed no, in fact, everything is seen inside China. And to your point, they're using that data for nefarious purposes, including to surveil the locations of specific Americans. And as you pointed in those tweets as well, for foreign influence operations.
Yeah, and so it seems like TikTok needs to be more heavily regulated in the United States, not from a censorship perspective or anything that we've been concerned about with conservatives being silenced on social media platforms, but more of a surveillance and almost like a spying app in a sense. So is there a way to do this responsibly legislatively that balances those two interests between free speech versus not giving the Chinese Communist Party information on Americans, specifically lawmakers, that we don't want them to have?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, look, I've had more than my fair share of criticism probably of U.S. social media companies, and there's obviously a lot more that we need to do on that front. But TikTok presents issues that are fundamentally different from those other ones. And as you laid out, it's a question of TikTok's conduct, not its content. So the conduct is the national security threat, which gives us room to regulate without violating the free speech rights or the First Amendment, that application. And similarly, some people have said, well, should we just put better baseline privacy rules in place so that no data goes outside of the U.S.? And that's a great idea for ordinary, trustworthy companies. But TikTok itself tried to wall up its own data from personnel in Beijing, and they repeatedly failed. Why? Because they're ultimately beholden to the CCP. So it's made clear that only a structural remedy forcing TikTok to be broken off from the CCP works. And then people that love TikTok, it's not for me, but if you love it, you can keep using it in a way that isn't a national security risk.
Right. And so is there legislation that Capitol Hill is even contemplating that does balance these interests? Or, I mean, it seems like, especially with Special Counsel Herr's testimony today, that maybe there is a little bit of disconnect in the priorities on Capitol Hill. It seems like being concerned about privacy interests and not going to the Chinese Communist Party should kind of be a priority for Capitol Hill.
Yeah, exactly right. There's a lot of different bills that have been introduced on TikTok. They do lots of different things. And so I think there's some confusion about that. There's one particular bill. It passed out of House Commerce Committee last week in a 50-0 vote. And it's supposed to be voted on the House floor this week. And that bill is really good piece of legislation. What it does is it only goes after foreign controlled applications, only from countries that are our adversaries. So that's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, only if they're a national security threat. And again, additional hoops, only if there's public process and notification to Congress. So it doesn't give the government any authority to go after individual users. It doesn't go after U.S. Businesses or any and all websites. It's a very targeted law that took a long time to get it to where it is. And in fact, it responded to a lot of concerns with prior TikTok legislation. So it's small, targeted. It's a really good win for the American people.
Wow. And this kind of thing isn't really even being discussed that much in mainstream media, even though you had a lot of Capitol Hill staffers responding to that report. I think it was from Politico, saying that they were so concerned that Capitol Hill was just going to ban TikTok in the United States. You had a lot of those users, especially the young Gen Zers, and then, kind of some of the grandmas, which that surprised me, actually calling on Capitol Hill and saying, please don't ban TikTok. So it doesn't seem like there's a lot of really good messaging around that. But does this particular piece of legislation only at this point capture TikTok, or are there other apps that would fit within those parameters?
Yeah, it's principally about TikTok. That's a company that they name expressly in the legislation. And again, there's a small piece of it that says basically if you're like TikTok, meaning, again, you got to jump through 5 hoops. You got to be owned by or controlled by a foreign government. You got to be a national security threat, all these additional hoops. Then we could get some other applications. And remember back in 2020, for instance, President Trump moved on both TikTok and WeChat. And so there's other ones that I would like to get as well. But in the main, the case to the public has only been made at this point with TikTok. And so that's the focus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because TikTok, of course, being controlled by the Chinese Communist Party has been more in the media as opposed to some of Facebook, Instagram, and some of those sorts of things. But in just the last couple of minutes that I have with you, Brendan Carr, and I so appreciate you dropping by. When we look at the difference in content and what has been put even on applications like Facebook and Instagram that are more for self-harm and eating disorders and some of those types of things, and all these social media influencers, and we're talking about just that piece of it that isn't exclusive to TikTok. Is there or should there be, in your mind, legislation surrounding that type of content, particularly for minors? When we look at things like national security, of course, that's a different question. But when we look at content regulation, is that something that's being contemplated or should be contemplated on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've long pushed for Section 230 reform, which would put some guardrails on the censorship that we've seen taking place in Silicon Valley. In terms of kids' online safety, there's a lot of interesting bills working through Congress. But to your point, all of those things are things we can address, but are unaddressable as long as TikTok continues to be beholden to the CCP. And on the content side, to your point, the algorithm very clearly, studies have shown, portray drastically different content on TikTok than any other social media, and content that is drastically aligned with CCP. And again, this isn't about that content or pushing back on that content. It's further evidence that at the end of the day, the CCP is the one that's calling the shots here.
Yeah, we definitely need reform. And Brendan Carr, really appreciate your time. And this is what's so important, to keep on top of what is going on Capitol Hill. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path. And now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com, and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. Turning our attention now to world events, the United States is evacuating Americans from Haiti. This coming today from the New York Post. The headline saying gang leader named Barbecue is now the most powerful man in Haiti as the United States evacuates Americans. Haiti's most notorious gang leader, known as Barbecue, may be the most powerful man in the nation as the prime minister remains unable to return home. On Sunday, the U.S. announced that troops had evacuated Americans from the U.S. Embassy, and additional forces were brought in to secure the diplomatic compound in Port-au-Prince. Jimmy Cherizier, the leader of the notorious G9 and Family gang, is in command of the bulk of the gunmen stirring anarchy in the capital, and he vowed to fight until embattled Prime Minister Ariel Henry resigns. Quote, I am ready to make an alliance with the devil, ready to sleep in the same bed as the devil, this gang leader told his supporters last week as fighters destroyed police stations and other government facilities. So Dr. David Grantham, who's the CEO of the Threat Management Group, joins me now to discuss more. So what is going on in Haiti with this gang leader, and what does this signal for specifically Americans and our embassy there in Port-au-Prince?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My heart goes out to the Haitians, the innocent victims of this. They're living a nightmare right now, so my heart goes out to them. As for the situation in Haiti, I think there's many layers to it, but the primary thing that Americans, in my estimation, need to be cognizant of is Haiti is on the same island as the Dominican Republic. And the Dominican Republic is one of the few remaining allies of the United States in Latin America. And the Dominicans, speaking to several contacts I have there, they're worried about the escalation because of the historic hostility between the two countries. They're fearful that this violence could spill over into their country, creating a security crisis, humanitarian crisis that could engulf the whole island. And losing stability in the Dominican Republic for the United States is a very troubling possibility. And with Mexico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, the three of them there, if Dominican Republic goes, we're looking at several countries that are not favorable to the United States. So that's the worst case scenario. But I think as Americans, they need to be cognizant of the role, not only the problems in Haiti and how that could spill over humanitarian crisis in the United States, into Florida in particular, but also the geopolitical ramifications for the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And I think a lot of Americans just generally really aren't aware of this. And so we've seen the recent headlines with Joe Biden's administration acknowledging and admitting that they've been flying in over 350,000 illegals. And of course, Joe Biden apologizing for calling a Venezuelan illegal who murdered that college student in Georgia, apologizing for calling him an illegal at the State of the Union last night. And so where has the Biden administration been, if at all, on whether or not the United States will accept refugees rather than just being concerned about American citizens?
Well, the administration is kind of between a rock and a hard place here, because the state of security in Haiti poses a significant problem to the United States, but we also have a border crisis. I don't know that there's many specific plans to address the possibility of a humanitarian crisis, partly because a lot of American resources are going to be tied up in the border area for that very purpose, around asylum seeking, around deportation, etc. I think for the United States, that any plan needs to come with a clear exit strategy. In my estimation, it would seem at this point that a peacekeeping force would be the most logical, an international peacekeeping force would be the most logical avenue, partly because it's a security threat. And there is a functioning government. I use that term loosely, but there is a functioning government in place that has been really pushed into quote unquote exile. So it's not a situation in which there's a quote unquote civil war per se. You could reclaim authority through an existing government body. So a peacekeeping force might be the most logical scenario, but the longer that the international community waits to decide on whether that's feasible, the longer that this goes on. I mean, Port-au-Prince, I saw a stat this morning that said something like roughly 80% of the city is occupied or under some sort of control of gang members or some sort of criminal element.
Wow. And certainly, this would seem incumbent on President Biden to at least address. And so far, there really hasn't been anything to speak of, at least in terms of, him coming out and addressing the press or specifically addressing this crisis. And so What is the national and I guess world stage tenor on this when you look at some of the key players and the decision makers? I mean, is this sort of just left up to the United States to take some cues from some of the other countries, or should we expect Biden to be actually a world leader on this?
Well, I think the United States, just by proximity to the island, is going to have to burden a certain amount of responsibility to help stabilize. I just think our interests are there. Without unpacking a whole entire plan, I do think there are, if nothing else, proximity interests for the United States. There's a lot of Haitians that live in the United States. And there's a vested interest in seeing that country stable and thriving. The international community has a little bit less of a interest outside of maybe it could be ethnic relationships. It could be some sort of political relationships. But Haiti isn't, for instance, a country that's exporting a particular thing that the international community needs. So therefore, there's going to be less recourse to respond outside of some sort of economic interest outside the Western Hemisphere. So all that to say, I do think the United States, whether they like it or not, we will have a certain amount of responsibility that is going to come our way in order to help stabilize this. And whether that's via the Dominican Republic, where we help the Dominican Republic make sure they remain stable and it doesn't flow over, whether it's leading a peacekeeping force, I think those are all options. But time is of the essence, and some sort of decision will need to be made, and the Biden administration.
Yeah, and we'll have to leave it there. Dr. David Grantham, really appreciate your analysis and commentary. And of course, we do pray for all of the safety for all of the American citizens who need to get out at this time. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. And finally tonight, there is news on Bitcoin. Bitcoin, remember that? That's the crypto that kind of crashed, and we haven't heard quite a lot about that. But there are still a few investors, and the economic status of that is newsworthy. And so this coming from the Economic Times. Cryptocurrency price on March 11th, Bitcoin surges to a new all-time high, crosses the $71,000 mark for the first time. This goes on to say Bitcoin gained nearly 70% this year, and most of the rise has come in the last few weeks, boosted by a flood of cash into the new spot Bitcoin exchange-traded funds, as well as hopes that the Federal Reserve will soon cut interest rates. In the last 24 hours, Bitcoin jumped to an intraday peak of over $71,000 in volatile trading. It was last 2.4% higher at 70,900 at 1:07 p.m. IST. So joining me now is Erik Finman, who is a crypto investor. And Erik, there was a lot of controversy in the last couple of years surrounding crypto and Bitcoin in particular, because this isn't as regulated by the U.S. government and the feds, and they really hate that, and so definitely want to change that. But where do you see Bitcoin on the scale of being a worthy investment?
Yeah, I mean, I got into Bitcoin initially because of the technology. It's one of the few things where if you were just kind of into niche politics at the time, particularly libertarian politics, you could make a lot of money, and we all kind of thought it was going to be big in the way you think world peace is going to happen. You hope it'll happen, but you're not necessarily sure it will. But yeah, I mean, I think people should look at it as the technology is this international way of transmitting money that, it's impossible to ban, at least on a technical level. And when it comes to investing in it, it's I got in at least at $12. So anything more than $12 is a plus for me. But that necessarily isn't the case with most people. So, invest at your own risk on that front. But, I think at least in my opinion, what I use it for is kind of more as a digital gold type mindset. So, it's a good kind of reserve if things go poorly in the world, and it definitely has lots of swings, both up and down.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I guess any sort of volatile investment like that, you kind of do it at your own risk for sure. And we're not at all giving financial advice on this program for sure. But just in terms of looking at Bitcoin and the phenomenon, what do you make of kind of this rise that Bitcoin is now seeing a flood of cash, and investors are looking at cryptocurrency in a way that I think has really gone on the rise, when we sort of thought that maybe the crypto bros were kind of seeing their last heyday over the last couple of years, when we saw that crash a little bit more. So what do you attribute that rise to?
Yeah, I mean, it was before I get to the rise, I'll get to the recent fall of, yeah, it was unfortunate that kind of SBF dumped on the entire industry in many ways, because, he had hired 12 PR firms on retainer. So he was a very famous guy. And, and if you're if you have a very great, very, very big rise, sometimes people want to see you fall, and especially you fall if you're doing things that are wrong and are your fault, which is what he did. So it's nice to see kind of Bitcoin get some positive press, given that its rise. And why it's risen, I think it's a blend of two things. I think politics has always had an impact on the price of Bitcoin, in the same way politics can have the impact on the price of gold. So I think now that kind of the stage is set for the most part, that it's going to be Trump versus Biden, I think that has a contributing factor to the rise of it. And then that can have just a medium-sized effect. But then because Bitcoin just has so many, you have the traders have bots that basically, if they see a rise, they're just programmed to kind of buy more or sell. People have a lot of stop trades and a lot of automatic buys and everything. So when there's just kind of a flutter of authentic momentum, that momentum can really increase into something so much bigger, whether that be increasing it to have the price rise 10 grand in a week or something, or fall 10 grand in a week. So that's kind of my thoughts on it.
So as an investor yourself, I mean, when Capitol Hill is looking at this, and of course, the feds would love to have more control over cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin, than they do. And you mentioned, I think rightly so, that politics influences a lot of the not just availability, but the attractiveness of some of these investments. What in your mind would cause investors like you and others to maybe hesitate to use Bitcoin if the feds tried to regulate this as much as some of those, especially on the left, would like to?
Yeah, I mean, that would hurt if the United States were to put really steep I mean, they kind of already have a lot of steep regulations, at least by, I don't know, a crypto guy's definition. It used to be so much easier to buy Bitcoin. It was easy as buying something off Amazon. So when people go, oh, how do I get into it? It's complicated. That's Bitcoin's fault, but it's really not. There's all these regulations that are on it already that make it such a process to buy. So yeah, if the United States were to put even stricter regulations on it, or were to ban it, that would definitely, in my opinion, hurt the price of Bitcoin by far. But the beauty of Bitcoin is that it's at a technological level unbannable. How I got into Bitcoin, again, I was a weird kid. There was all these other previous kind of iterations of Bitcoin before Bitcoin ever existed that the United States government put in jail. So there was hash-based, digital currencies, where those were shut down in the mid-2000s by the federal government. There's this guy that tried to start Liberty Dollar, where it was like, going back to the gold and silver-backed currency, and it had like Ron Paul's face on it. And he had this own, kind of almost his own personal reserve, where if you bought a $10 silver certificate, you could redeem that with him and his own little mini Federal Reserve. That guy went to jail in like 2005 for that, and got completely shut down. So I mean, it's impossible to ban. That's the beauty of the blockchain technology and why it was invented, and why the founder of Bitcoin was initially anonymous, because and still anonymous, because you went to jail if you started a competing currency. The United States government, it's against the law as of now on the books to start a competing currency in the United States to the U.S. dollar.
All this is really fascinating. Yeah. Erik Finman, really fascinating stuff here. And, it's like Trump bucks, invest in your own risk. And I think some of those people are learning the consequences of that. But that's all the time we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. You can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at salemnewschannel.com.